We'll get started. But it was funny that we had, I think it was AJ was the journalism mentor, and his parents showed up as a co-host. So just really funny. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in just a minute here. So feel free to get settled in. All right, so we can get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Christopher Jack. I am one of the partnerships managers here at Polygence. I want to welcome everybody to today's Ask Me Anything webinar, which is with Sejal Dua. The title is My Journey in Sports Analytics. This is our 8th and final Ask Me Anything webinar. So I'm really glad to have everybody here on I know it's Friday night. It's 8:30 Eastern time. So for a lot of you folks, it's AP finals week as well. So thank you all so much for joining. I also know that the Boston Celtics and Philadelphia 76ers are playing right now. So again, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on a Friday night. So just kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to turn this over in a few minutes here to Sejal to do an introduction. We're also going to cover just kind of the data analytics and sports analytics field as an overview. We'll also talk about Sejal's journey from high school to becoming a data analyst at Nike. And we'll also cover the impact of mentorship, just because here at Polygence, we are a mentorship program. Mentorship is a really important part of what we do. And of course, if you are interested in further pursuing either a project here at Polygence, or just generally speaking, if you're interested in moving forward at some point with the sports analytics field, then absolutely we'll talk about those next steps. If you are interested in moving forward with either a project or just further exploring the field. This is an Ask Me Anything webinar, so absolutely feel free to jump in with any questions at any time. This is also being recorded, so if you have to drop off for any reason, or if you are staying all the way through and you have some friends that you think might be interested in learning more about sports analytics, we'll be sending out the recording after the webinar this evening. But again, if you do have any questions along the way, you do not need to wait until the end of the webinar to ask those questions. You can, of course, ask those questions in the Q&A section, which should be at the bottom of your screen. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Sejal to do an introduction.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. Yeah, excited to have you all here. I'm really happy to field whatever questions you may have, but to get the conversation rolling, figured I'd tell you a little bit about myself. So just for background, I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm currently calling in from here. It's my hometown, but I actually went to college in Boston, so go Celtics. And at Tufts University, I studied actually, I declared my initial major as biomedical engineering. I've always been interested in math and science, but data science was a growing field at the time that I was pursuing my degree, and it became an option to major in when I was a sophomore. So I actually picked up a double major in data science and biomedical engineering, and I got to work in a cool research lab combining those two concentrations. And I also got to study abroad, where I got further into analytics, AI, deep learning, and got to take a ton of cool classes in Copenhagen. And currently while I work for Nike, I'm pursuing a Master's of Science in Analytics from Georgia Tech. And just for some experience, this may be something you all are more curious about, but I've had a pretty windy road into sports analytics. And so I started out as a software engineering intern and kind of pursued a variety of work experience through startups. And then I also got some research experience through IBM, and then made the pivot to join Nike, where I actually am fortunate enough to get to kind of trial two different roles at the same time, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I'm with the sports marketing team at Nike now.
Awesome. Definitely a long and winding road there, which is pretty awesome. So I want to jump in and just kind of get to the heart of your background. And, one of the questions that is often asked is sort of, what exactly is sports analytics? So can you talk a little bit about what that means and why that's important?
Yeah, totally. So sports analytics is a growing field. It's a really exciting field. A lot of people, when they hear the word sports analytics, they think Moneyball. So hence the picture I threw up of Brad Pitt there in the bottom left. But yeah, sports analytics, as I've been getting to know it more and more, has many facets to it. There's a business side and a fan engagement side to it. So lots of problems to solve there of using data on, when you think about it, sports is actually it's a sub industry within the larger entertainment industry. So that comes with a lot of interesting data like viewership from TV, like stadiums need to optimize their experience for fans, ticketing, that's a side of sports analytics. But then there's also a player performance side, a team performance side. So that's on-court analytics. There's, strategic problems to solve. So how do we think about how many games we can get away with having LeBron resting on the bench, so that we manage his load and don't kind of risk injury with these star athletes. That's an interesting problem to solve. And then there's player development as well. So how can we project someone's future value before they've kind of hit their peak performance? And yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to join the field. I feel like you can tap into the robust technology innovations that are going on in AI and machine learning. But one thing that's growing in parallel is the data sets that we now have access to in sports analytics are only getting much more rich. And that's partially due to sports betting being an emerging industry. And it's partially just great tracking technology and great statistical capturing. And so that makes the field even more exciting because we have this tech toolkit, all these weapons to pull out to apply on our data, and the data is just getting better and better.
So I'm so glad you mentioned this idea of sports analytics applying in a couple of different ways. One is, the athlete and sort of the on-field performance, but also the fan experience. One question that I just sort of popped in my brain here is, how has sports analytics changed the fan experience in maybe the last decade or 2 decades?
Yeah, totally. So I think it's changed the fan experience in many ways. I mean, I personally have observed myself become more interested in sports lately, and I chalk it up to a few reasons. One thing is the broadcasting experience and what the kind of act of watching a game on TV, no matter what sport you're talking about, is getting much more data intertwined, or there's much more nuggets of data that broadcasters will drop into the commentary, and that's because the fans are getting much more data savvy and receptive to ways of, pulling up historical records and talking about how significant a certain victory was in the context of, what's happened historically. And so that that creates a really interesting fan experience, as well as again, with betting and with one example is rule changes are data driven now. And so there's talks of, should there be a 4-point shot in basketball, or should there be a baseball shot clock so that the games aren't so long? And to see that is actually, it's not just a talk that's happening, but the data has led to these changes taking place, I think goes to show that sports analytics has the potential to change the fan experience, and in positive ways and in ways where we may have some, learning pain, growing pains from just not trying to, like, people love the historical traditional nature of sports. So you can't change up too much, but it's an interesting balance to try to juggle.
You bring up, and I'm so glad you said that, that last line there about tradition. And this is actually a great example portrayed in Moneyball, which is one of my favorite movies. By the way, just for transparency purposes, everybody in the audience, I am a huge Red Sox fan. I grew up in Boston, and I went through the whole 2003, 2004 World Series thing. And I was in high school and into college when Moneyball sort of happened, and with the Oakland Athletics. So, but I'm curious about how has sports analytics bucked against tradition, and are there still traditionalists out there that just are really still resistant to sports analytics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. And I think I see a lot actually in work because, historically there's an art and a science to sports marketing and to sports analytics both. And a lot of one interesting fact that I learned when I took my job is that the average tenure in sports marketing is 20 years. And so that just is a really strong statement in, when you become an expert and you dive into this field wholeheartedly, you tend to stick around and you become a seasoned veteran of sorts. And we see this in Moneyball a little bit, of some resistance from executives to lean into what the data is saying. And I think it's always going to be some small element of sports analytics. One example that comes to mind is I can just kind of see how much certain teams and certain coaches adopt sports analytics, because teams, you can kind of measure this just based on how large the sports analytics department is for the LA Dodgers, for example, versus a more traditional team. And I think eventually maybe we'll see a convergence towards outsourcing certain decisions to the data and to the models, but retaining some aspect of the art. But I do think there are some organizations that believe the art in scouting talent especially can't be automated, or an algorithm will never be as good as a human at it. And where I stand on that is probably pretty obvious because I'm biased here, but I think it's that much more exciting as a challenge to kind of prove with data why we should, really figure out where to draw the line between art and science.
It's almost like the data analytics is really a tool in the tool belt, but there's still the human element that is at play here. And how executives and agents and that sort of thing, how they weigh whether it's they put more weight on the human element or more weight on the analytics element. It's really, it differs from person to person. I am curious though, data analytics versus data science, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, totally. So I actually included this image here to kind of serve as a visual guide for describing this difference. And it's one that I've wrestled with as I've navigated down my windy career path. I initially decided to major in data science because of the explanation I was given about what data science is, but I've come to learn kind of how to differentiate the two. And so I'll start with data science. One piece of advice that I was given when I was about in high school was that, no matter what technical skill set I want to hone, there's always going to be a need to differentiate myself with domain expertise. And that's where data science, in this Venn diagram, that's why I love it so much. It kind of just goes to show that a data scientist is not a software engineer or a like purely algorithms person, because it requires this blend of coding skills, some stats, and some understanding of how to work with distributions of numbers, and also a level of business expertise or domain expertise. And I'd be lying if I said I ever see myself becoming an expert in every sport. So even just picking some small aspect of one sport to be an expert in, maybe it's like just pitching in baseball. You're gonna be a data scientist that studies all aspects of pitching in baseball. That is a great way to kind of summarize what a data scientist day-to-day would look like. First, it requires programming skills to get the data in your hands. And then it requires a lot of exploratory data analysis and some modeling, some algorithms to answer a question with the data or kind of come to a decision using the data. And then ultimately you have to tie it back to a stakeholder or a coach or whoever you're going to present to by using your domain expertise to your advantage and showing that, this is why I feel kind of lucky to be a data scientist, in that, AI and robots can't ever really do what we do, because you have to kind of be a nerd about sports and be able to talk in sports language when you tie it back to whoever is going to be making a decision. And then data analytics, I would say, it's not any lesser than data science. I don't want this Venn diagram to make that point, but what it is less of is making the data pipelines work in order to get the data. And that's where I think it helps lower the barrier to entry for, especially like when I was in high school and when I was getting into the field, I didn't have the skill set to do anything crazy with the data that was at my disposal. And so analytics kind of helps not have to be so reliant on a really computational coding background. And instead you can quickly do probably a 1 hour maximum task of getting data. And from there, it's all getting to play with the data. And that's the great thing about analytics in sports.
We actually have two questions here. So one question is, which coding language is most often used in an analytics setting?
Yeah, so yeah, great question. I would say my answer to that has been stronger in the past, and my answer would have been Python. Definitely, you should pick up Python. However, I'd say now, as I've seen languages become less important and become easier to learn, Python or R is a good place to start. R can do just about everything Python can do. I personally prefer Python, but I've learned that knowing a bit of both has helped. That being said, I didn't know any R for about 5 years, and I I was able to do everything I wanted to do with just one of those two languages. And the reason why they're really powerful is there's this concept called data frames, and it's a way of doing Excel-like tasks with like very simple one-line code statements. And so when I have a table worth of player data for the NFL, if I know Python or R, I can, sum up like the number of yards for all the wide receivers in this data set in just one line of code. And being able to kind of, I call it massage your data like this, is really powerful, because you don't want to have to build out hundreds of sheets in Excel and then lose track of everything.
That's great to know. And I've heard previously that R is commonly used in data analytics, and as well as Python. Are there any other languages that might be worth learning, or other sort of softwares? I know Tableau is a pretty powerful tool for analysts. Any other softwares that you recommend?
Yeah, totally. So I would say that on most job descriptions and just in the field of analytics in general, a good trifecta to have on your resume one day would be some kind of query language. So SQL is a basic thing to know, and it doesn't have to be anything advanced, but SQL is short for structured query language. And if your data lives in some kind of database that's hosted online, being able to get a subset of that data from a SQL statement will just let you move on to the analytics portion of a project. And it's really important because otherwise, if you don't know SQL, you become a little bit more reliant on the data being cleaned up for you and in a flat file like a CSV. This is actually something I help my students with, because I don't expect my students to know SQL at a high school level. I didn't know SQL. So just getting that data and helping get it in the format that they want, I think helps kickstart the fun part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so SQL for getting the data, Python or R for crunching the numbers, and Tableau for building, or Power BI or any visualization software for building a storytelling component that kind of represents the deliverable of a project.
Yeah, and I think that's actually we use Tableau here at Polygence internally, and it's an incredibly powerful tool, especially if you are interested in data science and data analytics, and being able to sort of display and show the data in a much more digestible way. And it's a really cool visual tool. So I want to get this, actually another great question here from Dylan. I'm going to college next year and I'm going to study sports management, but I'm considering sports analytics. Do you think someone who has more of a knack for business rather than mathematics has a place in the field of sports analytics? Does someone studying the field have to love math?
That's a really great question, Dylan. And it's one that speaks to me dearly because my brother is actually studying sport management currently. And we always talk about how we're going to create some kind of podcast or some kind of duo where I'm the numbers side and he's the business side. And he's enjoyed studying sport management a lot. So please don't let me bias your decision, but I'll give you my 2 cents on sport analytics versus sport management. I actually this year got the privilege to go to a conference called the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. And there I was part of a mentorship program. I got assigned a mentor and got to learn more about the business side. I actually saw a lot of attendees of this conference who were attending the sports analytics conference, but they were studying sport management. So there's a lot of overlap is the long story short. But one thing that I would keep in mind when making this decision is that both roles require some element of analytical data savvy thinking. and business thinking. And the ratio of what you want to your day-to-day to look like will kind of drive this decision. But I would say that sport management there is a limiting component to what you can do in sport management without the ability to work with data. So if you pursue sport management, I'd recommend supplementing that with some element of getting comfortable with data so that you can differentiate yourself and bring a lot of value to the table in sport management. Sport analytics, I would say the same thing goes, right? Like you can't be a great sport analyst without having a strong business savviness to you. And so that is where your potential gets kind of capped. And that's actually what I'm looking to supplement right now. I want to develop through my master's program this like business acumen for what I can do with the outputs of my analytics. And so I would just say like weigh those two and figure out, to answer your question about math, you definitely don't have to love math. I think the curiosity for whatever problem or question you're trying to answer usually makes the math not miserable. And luckily, luckily, a lot of the software's packages today will do the math in a pretty elegant way without you having to kind of get your hands dirty with it. So I wouldn't be fearful of the math.
Awesome, great answer. I have two more quick questions here, and then I wanted to ask about sort of the career opportunities. I know you had touched on this a little bit earlier, but do you need to have any database knowledge or any ETLs? I'm not sure what an ETL is, but database knowledge or ETL.
Yeah, so ETL, for context to those in the audience, is short for extract, transform, load. It's the ability to take raw and messy data and kind of convert it to a format that's usable for whatever project you're starting in. And so to answer the question of do you need to have database knowledge or the ability to wrangle data like that, I would say that's in this Venn diagram here, that's more of a data engineer's role. It depends on what org, like it depends on if we're talking about a role that you're in or some long-term pursuit within sports analytics. Like, you know, there are times where I don't get to say I'm a data engineer, but I'm unfortunately having to do some ETL. And so you kind of, sorry, you kind of have to do it when the situation calls. But that being said, there's a lot of, and we can get to this towards the end, but in my resources section for people who want to get started with sports analytics, the way I got started was by learning how to scrape data from online websites. And I found that when I was pursuing biomedical engineering, the data accessibility was a huge pain point of mine. The data was far too sensitive for a young college freshman to get to play with. So what I did is I learned how to scrape data from just a website that was pretty basic HTML code. And I saw there was players and there was a bunch of numbers, and I learned how to write a simple Python script of about 100 lines maybe to get all the data into a table for me. And that part allowed me to ignore a lot of the data engineering parts that you need more professional expertise to be able to do. So I'd highly recommend trying out, like jumping to the analytics part, seeing how much you like it. But if you do get the opportunity to try out ETL and you like that element of it, I do know that the field has a high demand for data engineers. So if you can do that, you might want to consider pursuing that more, because the field could use that skill set in numbers.
Fantastic. There's another question here about data science as a major, but I want to hold off on that until a little bit later, just because we are going to talk a little bit more about universities and sort of Sejal's experience at university. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. But before we move on to the next slide here, you touched on this a little bit, you know, sort of the career opportunities, and you specified analytics in terms of like the fan experience, analytics in terms of sort of the player performance and on-field experience, but just generally speaking, can you speak to just the overall career opportunities for someone that's interested in data science or in sports analytics?
Yeah, totally. So I'll tap into a lot of what I learned from the conference in this one. So what I learned is there are a lot of team roles that require business intelligence engineers, people who can spin up Tableau dashboards for the Celtics or the Red Sox and be able to summarize various aspects of the databases that are constantly being refreshed on the team side. And that being able to provide analysis on that will help a team develop a winning strategy for games, optimize their fan experience, consider what ticketing demand would look like next year, even help them with the upcoming draft. So that's a pretty exciting, wide-ranging place to be. So that's the team side. And then there's the business side, which would be joining like the NBA, for example, or a company that's more spread out across all various aspects, like all off-court aspects of the game. And those companies are, there's consultancy groups, there's, working for a league, working for a sports betting company, working for a ticketing company like Ticketmaster. And so that I would say, you can generalize the type of data science knowledge that you would bring to the table there, and you don't have to be an expert on as much about the sport itself. There's also, I'm noticing, a career path in research. And so a lot of R&D that goes on in sports is now expanding and being embedded within each team. And the R&D work is really exciting because it's pretty democratized. So you don't have to, you can actually like almost think of this as you would research generally. So you would write papers, submit them to be published, and maybe even go to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference with your paper as a submission. And you would also get to build upon the work of others. So if you really like the more math heavy side of sports analytics, and you're really like, this photo in the bottom, like maybe there's like an optimal angle to kick a soccer ball from when you're standing in a certain position, and maybe you need a certain strength to weight ratio or like muscle mass percentage to thrive in a certain position. You can analyze a lot of the data that's now available on biometrics and performance analysis. And so that research space is also an option. Or you can pursue a path like me and join a company that has a branch of sports analytics.
It's very reminiscent of Bill James. And for those who were interested in or who've seen Moneyball, which I think probably most of the people in the audience have seen it. Bill James, of course, was the I think if I remember correctly, he created wins above replacement, which was then sort of used by Billy Beane with the Oakland Athletics in 2002, I believe, which then sort of is now used by almost every team. So there's a couple more questions here, but I want to jump to our next slide. So what I'd love to do is kind of speak more to your experience and just kind of what actually got you interested in the first place to consider sports analytics as a career path.
Yeah, so happy to talk about this. I grew up as an avid athlete. Like I said, my brother studied sport management, so grew up in a big sport household, and I played basketball, lacrosse, tennis, and now I also do some long distance running. And what I kind of didn't realize at the time was that my love for sport wasn't just an extracurricular to like keep myself, to kind of just get myself tired at the end of the day. It was actually a deep passion for trying to optimize like the way I showed up on the court or field. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with that, especially because when I was in high school, I, took a bunch of AP science classes and AP physics and AP computer science, didn't at all really ring a bell of, oh, maybe sports analytics will be somewhat relevant here. So I thought I would pursue traditional engineering because that's the way my high school experience looked on paper. But what I realized, and I touched on this a bit earlier, was that getting my foot in the door, getting my feet wet is the phrase, I guess, was really hard to do because the barrier to entry was really hard. And so I'm someone who needs that hands-on learning early on in order to get excited about a field. And it just felt like the biomedical engineering path, it just entailed more school and more uncertainty on what my job would even look like. And so I wanted something that I could kind of not have to be that patient with and just get started in a scrappy manner. And what I was able to do to get started was I was able to download my own data from my wearable, like my Fitbit or my Apple Watch or whatever I was wearing at the time. I just did a quick analysis on, like, back then there was not a lot of sleep data coming through these wearable devices. It was really just like steps and heart rate and loose measurements, but it was pretty continuous data. So in being able to download my own data and get started with my own projects, I realized like how powerful it could be to get quick access to data and come up with, I have this to this day, I have a note app, a note on my notes app that's just a running list of questions that I want to answer. Like, how many hours of sleep leads to the fastest running pace, or how many, just like for basketball questions when I'm watching on TV, I want to know like who's the center who has the best baseline shooting percentage, and like just quick things that I want to one day answer. I think that's such a great way to maintain that spark with a field that you're interested in.
What about your experience at Georgia Tech and Tufts University? You talk about just the overall experience that you had there.
Yeah, totally. So at Tufts, as I was kind of getting into data science, first of all, I was making sure to have fun, to play extracurriculars like Frisbee and lacrosse, and just staying curious about what kind of activities I wanted to explore. I think that's a really important point. I hope that all my mentees pick up on, is that like college doesn't have to be this very prescriptive route to some end goal. It can be a time to just use it as a sandbox for exploration of what you want to do.
The winding path.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of just being open-minded led to doors opening up. And one of those doors was getting to join a biomedical engineering lab where I got to study sweat through like these t-shirts that we were making for athletes to wear. And the t-shirts had these biocompatible patches that collected sweat and processed the chemical composition of that sweat so that we could study fatigue from exercise. And that experience really opened my mind to like all the various aspects of research and analysis and publications, how that all works. And it really helped me like take ownership of a project that I wanted to see through to the end. because a lot of the time in college, it's just like, oh, I have class, I gotta like finish this semester out, and then you like hit some kind of reset button and you're all of a sudden in a new semester. But this was like a something I could really sink my teeth into. And now at Georgia Tech, I'm kind of using what I know has inspired me and gotten me curious, and like circling back to all of that and learning new skills, and then like revisiting my list of things that intrigue me, and trying to like just continue that pursuit of like self-started projects, so that I can like figure out one day what domain is the one I want to specialize in as a data scientist.
We actually have a couple of great questions here that I think are pretty related to college and just thinking about for some of the students that are watching, high school students just thinking about their future. So the first question is, are there any universities that have data science as a major for undergraduates, if you know that offhand?
Yeah, so I think this is common now. I know Tufts is one such example of an undergraduate program with data science as a major. I do know when I was like opening my mind to data science as a major in college, it was a pretty new thing, and it was exciting, obviously, because data science was typically seen as a grad level concentration at most schools. I know NYU has a really established data science program. I know there are some others that I've heard of friends attending in the past. I think it's pretty, I know UT Austin has one, University of Chicago, I believe, has a strong program as well. And what I'd say is, if you're an undergrad looking to major in data science, one thing to keep in mind is it may be in the School of Engineering. So you would want to really understand the differences between the School of Engineering and the School of Arts and Sciences, and see if the type of course load and the type of rigor is what you're looking for in a program. Like whatever major speaks to you will maybe have trade-offs in terms of what other credits you might need, or what kind of, like, for example, when I was in the engineering school at Tufts pursuing data science, I didn't have to take a language requirement for my program, but I actually kind of wanted to. So that was something that I chose to squeeze in, even though engineers didn't have to study a foreign language. So just things like that are worth considering. And I would say the data science is so democratized now that while the prestige of a program might be somewhat important, I think making sure that it covers the topics that you want it to cover is also worth considering, because you want to get out of it the skill set that will help you after the program. And if you don't have, for example, deep learning offered as part of the program, that just means that you might want to pursue a MOOC class in the future, or supplement with a grad level program. So just try to get those boxes checked up front.
There's also, to supplement, there are a lot of tech boot camps that are out there that do offer data analytics and data science. I know there's like General Assembly, Thinkful, Coding Dojo, there's a few others as well. And they're usually you can kind of do them in the summer or kind of on your own time. So there's definitely, from my knowledge, my limited knowledge of the field, there's definitely some opportunities there to supplement. So another great question here is, I am interested in both the business and scientific side of sports, specifically business and kinesiology. Is there a way to combine these in analytics?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's one that, again, really, really speaks to me, because I agree with that exact same sentiment. And it's kind of one of my long-term life goals to combine analytics with kinesiology. So one detour answer is Nike has a group called the Sport Research Lab that I've kind of been curious about my whole life pretty much. And it combines analytics. Actually, I would say data science specifically. And the reason I say data science and not analytics is because in this sport research lab, there is a really high tech sensing infrastructure that we have this like track and this football field, and we bring in professional athletes with sensors all around that capture their, there's motion capture, there's force plates in the ground, and all of this data needs to be there needs to be an ETL pipeline. There needs to be a data warehouse to contain the data. And so there's a demand for data scientists, but again, going back to the whole point about domain expertise, the domain expertise here is data scientists who know kinesiology. They need to know how the body works in order to synthesize findings from this really rich data set. And so I would say that there is, when there are opportunities that involve kinesiology and analytics, they are sought after opportunities because it is the kind of holy grail of sports and sports science. I don't know if you've all seen the sports science segment on ESPN, but
It's great.
it was that got me interested in kinesiology. And I would say the fast track to getting into things like the Sport Research Lab or whatever equivalent that other companies have would be pursuing a higher level degree in kinesiology. And that's something that I considered and I still am considering because I think it just really differentiates you in terms of like, you can be the sharpest tool in the shed as a data scientist, but reporting on findings that are going to tell you what's going on in the athlete's body requires like many years of studying that. So yeah, definitely the opportunities exist, but it's just a matter of making like working on yourself and kind of developing your niche to get there.
And I imagine that going that route of combining, analytics, kinesiology, that there's probably a lot of internship opportunities out there, to sort of gain that experience, especially if you're, a college student, if you're a master's student as well. But that's really fascinating that there's that cross section between kinesiology and analytics. One more question, and then we can jump into, I guess, to be honest, we only have about 10 minutes left. And we have 2 more slides to go, but we can do kind of the lightning round for the last 2 slides. So did you do research in high school? And if you did you publish any papers? Did you use it as part of your application? Yeah, was research a part of your high school experience at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. It actually wasn't. I have the privilege of mentoring a student now through Polygence who just told me that he was taking AP research, and I was blown away. Like my jaw dropped when I heard that, and that sounds so cool. I'm so excited about the future of research starting at the high school level, and just like I suggest to my students all the time after we end our work together that they should find a local college professor to work with and try to cold email them to continue the work, because some of the stuff they do is really, really impressive. And if I could go back in time, I would have definitely loved to get involved with research. My first experience with research was with IBM Research, and I published a paper with them. And that whole process taught me so much about how to, go through the requirements of a journal and go through all the review process. So it was a great experience. What I will say about the way that translates in sports analytics is that there are lots of opportunities, and I try to encourage my students to pursue these opportunities. But a sports analytics project, as long as it has a great question and driving hypothesis, can be turned into a really legitimate paper even at the high school level. When I read sports analytics research papers, there is not a like if I had to sit down and predict the level from which the author was at, like I don't think I could do it. And it's because that if there's a really strong framework and a kind of outline for what the paper will cover, you can really output something that's high quality. And so I would say don't let the lack of potential research opportunities in high school deter you from having the end goal of taking an analytics project from start to finish and finish being the research paper, because that route, I've seen it work out successfully many times for high school students. And if if there's time, I can point you to, or I can compile a list of journals that contain really great high school work.
Actually, this brings up, I think, a pretty important question that I wanted to ask. I work with a lot of students here at Polygence, prospective students that are interested in sports analytics, and I found that in many cases, they actually struggle more to find a research topic than students that are, interested in studying, physics or, aerospace engineering. Can you provide maybe like one or two examples of good research questions for a high school student in the frame of sports analytics?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll try my best, top of my head, to think of it.
Put you on the spot.
I would say one of the things, and I totally get where this question comes from, because I mentor sports analytics students, and they're super passionate fans, and it seems as though it would be really easy to come up with a question, but I think part of the challenge is not knowing what data is available to inspire the questions. And so what we do in our first couple of sessions is browse the data, assess the data feasibility in terms of like, is this salary data even reliable? Would we be able to scrape it? Those kinds of questions. And then also think about, like I also have them read, do a literature review on 3 or 4 articles to see ways that people have approached taking a question and turning it into an analysis, because oftentimes we can come up with a list of questions, but there's not a lot of meat to that, like to the questions that we come up with. So making sure that it provides some kind of contribution that may not be as intuitive as just talking about sports with your friend is really important. And so some questions that my students have pursued in the past relate to the value, how like the value of wide receivers versus running backs has fluctuated or trended over time. And value is defined as kind of the percentage of a salary cap that gets allocated towards this position in the NFL. So that is a really interesting way to understand how the game is changing through the lens of the money that teams are willing to spend on a certain position. Another one is an analysis of international players versus US based players in the MLB, and just seeing through the lens of performance stats as well as salary, how that varies, and if COVID impacted that at all. Another one is there's this really rich data set of NBA sport tracking data where there's 20 data points per second worth of X, Y, and Z position data on every single player on the court. So like 10 players and their XYZ coordinates and the ball's coordinates for 20 seconds within, or 20 times within a second for an entire game. So you can essentially put together a video of where every single player was and watch a game like that. And what it allows you to do is a bunch of really cool geometric analysis on double teams and pick and roll coverage and things like that. And so I find that students get excited about the potential that the really rich data sets can unlock.
a great answer. And the running back wide receiver thing was really interesting, because, I don't know if you watched the NFL draft, but the Lions drafted a running back,
Yeah,
and very early, and that was a very controversial thing. And anyways,
very
I only have a couple more minutes left, but I told everybody here that I'm a big sports fan. So so I know we only have a few minutes left here, but what I'd love to do, and there's two more questions we can get to at the end, but can you talk in a minute, so lightning round, can you talk just briefly about mentors that have had an impact on your just your career path?
Yeah, totally. So as you can see from the photos, a lot of female mentors have had a really important impact on me. And I love that because, the field is pretty skewed towards men in terms of sports analytics, but it's moving towards women, and that's a big deal, I think. But yeah, just a quick lightning round. The top mentor with IBM Research, Ioana, she really empowered me to challenge myself and take on projects that are just slightly out of my reach and feel like they have slightly more question marks than I feel comfortable with. And that really helped me to not just pursue low-hanging fruit type of analysis projects. It helped me to think outside the box. So I really admire her innovative thinking. Megan Monroe is one of my professors at Tufts, who actually taught a sports analytics class my senior year. And it's what made me feel comfortable enough to take the leap from IBM to Nike. And what she taught me is just how much there is to gain from discovering my own voice and style through a technical project. And so not just doing things by the book, but being willing to insert my voice into the data storytelling that flows from a project. And Kelly was my mentor at the sports analytics conference. And she's actually really interesting because she didn't come from a sports analytics career trajectory. So she helped me to see that my career path doesn't have to make a lot of sense. And I really appreciate that because sometimes I overthink the life crisis of picking a career path.
One of the questions I had, about just now that you've had this great experience with these amazing mentors that have had such an impact on you, what was your reasoning for becoming a Polygence mentor?
Yeah, it's been a highlight of my post-COVID life. It's something that I feel strongly about in helping get open doors for people and get people a head start into a field that felt intimidating to me initially. So that's what, after the end of every session, I just feel so like my heart feels pretty full in seeing the excitement and opportunity that my students feel like they have, because there is truly nothing limiting you from getting started today. And unfortunately, when I was in high school, I felt like I had to wait or serve some kind of time until I could do what I wanted to do. But I think in today's world, like if you can empower people to just get started, that's the ultimate sense of fulfillment that you can gain from this. And some of the work my students do is like better than the work I do. I truly am learning so much, and it's like the coolest experience to get to learn from a student that you kind of see yourself in.
Yeah. So we're actually at time, but I wanted to maybe again, sort of 1 minute or less here. I'm a student. I'm a high school student. I'm interested in sports analytics. What next? How do I sort of start getting the ball rolling to explore this field more in depth?
Yeah. So first of all, my main advice is honestly find a data set that feels fun to you. And they say in running, when your legs are tired, it's your heart that will carry you through the finish line. And what I relate that to with projects at this level is when there are obstacles and barriers that come up, it's your intellectual curiosity and your passion that will get you through. Like it truly, if you pick the right data set and you're just feeling this sense of like can't sleep at night, ready to jump out of bed in the morning and tackle it, there's nothing that will stop you from finishing your project. So find a data set. Like if you're a Warriors fan, find the coolest Warriors data set out there and just figure out a question that's gonna like drive you insane if you can't answer. And I would just say get started with that, because it's just capitalizing on that passion and that like sense of urgency to find, like, extract the fruits of that analysis that will teach you so much, and it will lead to a finished project, which is really important, because I know I start a lot of projects that I don't finish. So pick a data set that you love and you'll finish the project, definitely.
Where can students find data sets specifically? And it's actually one of the questions that was asked, specifically if it's NFL, NBA, et cetera. Is there like one sort of source for all data or all sports, or is it segmented depending on the sport?
Yeah, great questions. So all major sports, NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and college too, they live on this, or most of the stats live on this site called sportsreference.com. So that site is, and fair warning, it looks really ugly, but it looks really ugly because it's meant to be scraped. It's literally designed with that understanding in mind. And so I'd say you can learn from an online quick course in about half an hour how to scrape a simple HTML website. So if you can learn how to scrape data and you go to Sports Reference and you find a sport that you want to study, you're already locked and loaded there. And another site I highly recommend is Kaggle.com. Kaggle is a Google research kind of site / project where they open source a bunch of sports data sets. So let's say you wanted to study the English Premier League or cricket or esports or any more small sports, like you can just type in that in the search bar and see what kind of free and widely available data sets pop up.
How do you spell that, Kaggle? Is it
Kaggle?
Got it.
Kaggle. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's the end of our webinar for today. So Sejal, thank you so much for being part of this webinar, this AMA series. As you can tell, I'm like totally geeking out over sports analytics. I genuinely, I grew up a sports fan, and this is really cool to be able to ask questions to somebody with this background. I literally probably have like 20 more questions that I could ask, very specific questions, but I will definitely take those offline. But for the audience members, if you are interested in moving forward with doing a project here at Polygence, you're more than welcome to log back into your Polygence account and then submit an application. Again, really what we're looking for here at Polygence to do a full project is simply, what is your research question? What do you want to better understand about a specific topic within sports, a specific question you have that relates to sports analytics. If you have any questions about the process, or you have questions about, just you kind of want to bounce an idea off of me, for a research project, you're welcome to reach out to me at cj@polygence.org. But otherwise, Sejal, thank you so much for being here tonight. Again, I know Boston Celtics, Philadelphia 76ers are playing right now, so I know you want to get back to that. There was actually one more question. This was one that you did answer earlier, but I wanted to just make sure that this question got answered. I'm curious about the coding aspect of sports analytics. Does working in that industry require a lot of coding knowledge? Can you recap that one more time?
Yeah, so I'd say the coding aspect is kind of as deep as you want to go with it. And again, my whole objective with being a mentor is to combat any intimidation factor that anyone feels. So I want to emphasize that there are a lot of resources to help you get started if you don't come from a coding background. When I got started, I didn't really know how to code, so I just downloaded stuff and did, Excel level analysis. But if you really do see yourself wanting to dive further into the field, Python or R is a great kind of tool to have in your toolkit. Just pick one of them for now and try to kind of develop enough proficiency of like the equivalent of, a Duolingo couple chat, it's one of those things where if you can do the basics, the basic 5 operations that you might need to be able to do to a data table, you're already kind of able to get into the fun part of the analysis. And so don't feel like first I need to learn all there is to learn about Python and then only I can get started. Kind of, I would say like learn it on the job, like try to learn it in parallel with what you want to do and let your passion again drive everything that you're doing.
Great answer. That's all I have for tonight. Again, thank you, Sejal, for joining us tonight. Again, thank you for everybody in the audience for joining us on a Friday night. Have a great weekend and go Celtics.
Go Celtics. Thanks for having me, CJ.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.